The conference room buzzed with energy when Thomas announced the promotion. My promotion. I'd worked late every night for 3 months straight, restructuring the entire client database. Everyone knew it was mine. Then he said Marcus Bennett's name. My name is Lucy Hart, and in that moment, everything I'd believed about hard work and fairness shattered. I'm 34 years old, and I'd given TechFlow Solutions 8 years of my life. 8 years that were about to teach me the hardest lesson I'd ever learn. The room erupted in applause. My hands moved automatically, clapping along with everyone else. My face arranged itself into a smile I didn't feel. Thomas looked directly at me across the polished conference table, his expression almost gleeful. "Lucy, you trained him so well," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You must be incredibly proud." Something snapped inside my chest. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a quiet breaking, like a thread pulled too tight. I kept clapping, kept smiling. But in that moment, everything changed. Marcus stood up, shaking hands, accepting congratulations he hadn't earned. He caught my eye briefly, and I saw it there, guilt mixed with triumph. He knew. They all knew. This wasn't an oversight. This was deliberate humiliation, planned and executed in front of 30 witnesses. Thomas wanted me to break down, to cry, to make a scene that would justify everything. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Walking back to my desk felt like moving through water. Every step required conscious effort. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my pace steady, my shoulders straight. No one met my eyes. Colleagues I'd helped with projects, people I'd covered for when they needed time off, suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. The silence around me was deafening. Marcus walked past my cubicle, already carrying himself differently. His posture had changed in minutes, from uncertain to entitled. He wore confidence like a jacket he'd stolen from my closet. I sat down carefully and opened my email. 43 unread messages. Half were congratulating Marcus. 3 were from Thomas, assigning me new tasks. Cleanup work, he called it. Organizing files. Updating spreadsheets. Busy work for someone who'd just been passed over. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to type a resignation email right then, walk out, never look back. But another part, a quieter, colder part, whispered something different. Wait. Watch. Learn. I'd never been written up. Never missed a deadline. My performance reviews were always excellent. Last quarter, I'd brought in 3 major clients worth over $2 million combined. I believed if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself valuable enough, I'd be safe. I'd be recognized. I'd advance based on merit. Standing in that conference room, watching Marcus accept my promotion, I realized how naive I'd been. This company didn't reward hard work. It rewarded compliance, obedience, the ability to make men like Thomas feel powerful. Marcus had that ability. I didn't. The question burning in my mind wasn't why him anymore. It was, why did Thomas need to humiliate me publicly? What was he trying to prove? I'd spent 8 years of 60-hour weeks, skipped lunches, and canceled weekend plans for TechFlow Solutions. 8 years believing that dedication and excellence would be enough. I was wrong. That afternoon, Thomas called me into his office. He sat behind his massive desk, fingers steepled, expression carefully arranged into something resembling concern. "Lucy, I wanted to thank you personally for being such a team player today," he began. "I know you were disappointed, but you handled it with real grace." I said nothing, just watched him. "This was a leadership decision," he continued, the words sounding rehearsed. "Marcus has certain qualities we need in that role right now. You understand, I'm sure." Something about his tone caught my attention. He wasn't nervous about my reaction. He was relieved. Relieved that I hadn't made a scene. Relieved that I'd clapped and smiled like a good little employee. "I understand completely," I said quietly. Thomas relaxed visibly. "I knew you would. You've always been reasonable, Lucy. That's what I appreciate about you. Reasonable. Compliant. Controllable. In that moment, I stopped defending myself in my own mind. Stopped replaying what I should have said, how I should have fought back. Instead, I started listening. Really listening. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying every meeting, every project, every interaction from the past year. Patterns emerged that I'd been too busy to notice before. The client presentation where Thomas had presented my research as the team's findings. The budget report where my analysis was rewritten with Marcus's name on top. The strategy meeting where my suggestion was dismissed, then repeated by Marcus 10 minutes later to sudden approval. I wasn't overlooked. I was systematically erased. Marcus wasn't exceptional at anything. His reports were adequate at best. His client relationships depended on work I'd done beforehand. His presentations used slides I'd created. But Marcus had one skill I lacked. He made Thomas feel important. He laughed at unfunny jokes. He asked for advice on decisions he could make himself. He deferred, complimented, and never questioned. Thomas hadn't chosen talent. He'd chosen control. And he passed over me because I was too competent, too independent, too likely to outshine him eventually. The next morning, I changed my approach. I became quieter in meetings, more accommodating. When Thomas made suggestions, I nodded thoughtfully instead of offering improvements. When Marcus took credit for my work, I smiled supportively. "That's a great idea, Marcus," I'd say, even though I'd emailed him that exact idea 2 days earlier. Thomas visibly relaxed. His shoulders dropped. His tone with me became almost friendly again. Without my competence as a silent threat, he could be generous. People always talk when they think you're harmless. Within a week, I learned more about office dynamics than I had in 8 years. Thomas complained about upper management during coffee breaks. Marcus confided about feeling overwhelmed. Colleagues mentioned budget concerns, timeline pressures, and internal politics I'd been too focused on my work to notice. I started a document on my personal laptop at home. Nothing dramatic. Just observations. Dates. Comments. Patterns. Not revenge. Insurance. 3 weeks after the promotion, I noticed something odd while organizing files. The cleanup work Thomas had assigned me. Budget numbers didn't match between departments. Small discrepancies, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. Expenses approved without proper documentation. Vendor payments that seemed high for the services provided, all requiring Thomas's signature. I dug deeper, carefully during my assigned filing time. The pattern became clearer. Thomas had been approving expenses for a consulting company called Vertex Advisory. $30,000 over 6 months, billed for strategic planning services. I searched our system for any reports or deliverables from Vertex Advisory. Nothing. No presentations. No analysis. No documentation of any work performed. I looked up Vertex Advisory online. The company existed, but the address listed was a P.O. box. The website was generic, with stock photos and vague service descriptions. Thomas's favoritism suddenly seemed like the least concerning problem. Marcus started cracking under the pressure. The role he'd wanted so badly came with expectations he couldn't meet. Quarterly reports. Client presentations. Strategic planning sessions where he actually needed to contribute ideas. He showed up at my desk 3 days before his first major presentation to the board. "Lucy, I need your help," he admitted, his confident mask slipping. "The numbers aren't making sense, and I can't figure out the projections Thomas wants." Part of me wanted to refuse. To let him fail publicly the way I'd been humiliated. But a cooler, more strategic part recognized an opportunity. "Of course," I said warmly. "Let me take a look." I helped him fix the projections. Made sure his presentation was clear and professional. Even gave him talking points for potential questions. Marcus was pathetically grateful. "I owe you, Lucy. Seriously." "We're a team," I replied, meaning something entirely different than he understood. By helping Marcus succeed, I became indispensable again. But this time, I controlled the narrative. For weeks after the promotion, Thomas made his biggest mistake. He assigned me to a comprehensive audit of our vendor contracts, more cleanup work meant to keep me busy and out of important meetings. "We need everything organized and updated in the system," he said dismissively. Should take you a few weeks. No rush. He had no idea what he'd just handed me. Full access to every contract, every payment record, every approval chain. Years of documentation that I could examine thoroughly under the guise of routine organization. I worked methodically, the way I'd always worked, but now I wasn't just organizing. I was building a case. Vertex Advisory wasn't the only problem. There were 3 other suspicious vendors, all with vague service descriptions, all approved exclusively by Thomas, all showing payment patterns that suggested something more than legitimate business expenses. I documented everything with screenshots and spreadsheets, cross-referenced dates with Thomas's calendar, tracked the money carefully. He'd given me the key to his downfall and called it cleanup work. I spent 6 weeks on that audit, working slowly and thoroughly. Thomas never checked my progress. He was too busy enjoying his power, making decisions, taking credit for work his department produced. I created a detailed file on my personal laptop, encrypted and backed up to a secure cloud service. Every questionable transaction, every approval bypass, every policy violation. Not revenge yet. Insurance. Because I'd learned something important during my 8 years at TechFlow. Timing matters more than anger. Evidence matters more than emotion. Patience matters more than pride. Marcus was struggling. His presentations improved with my help, but his strategic thinking remained shallow. In meetings, he'd parrot phrases from business articles without understanding them. When questioned, he'd deflect or defer to Thomas. The shine was already wearing off his promotion. People were starting to notice the gap between his title and his capabilities. I just needed to wait for the right moment. The moment came unexpectedly. Corporate announced an internal audit of all departments. Standard procedure happened every few years. Most people barely paid attention to the email. Thomas laughed it off in our team meeting. Nothing to worry about, folks. We run a tight ship here. They'll be in and out in a week. But I noticed something. His laugh sounded forced. His confidence seemed brittle. I didn't laugh. I pulled up the audit announcement and read it carefully. They'd be reviewing financial controls, vendor relationships, and approval processes. Exactly the areas where Thomas had been cutting corners. That night, I updated my documentation, made sure everything was pristine, clearly labeled, and easily understandable. Not because I planned to use it yet, but because I wanted to be ready when the opportunity presented itself. Thomas thought he was untouchable. 8 years at the company, good relationships with senior management, a track record of departmental success that looked impressive on paper. He'd forgotten that paper trails cut both ways. The audit team arrived on a Monday morning. 3 people from corporate with laptops and serious expressions. They set up in a conference room and started requesting documents. Thomas maintained his confident facade in meetings, but I watched him carefully. His jokes fell flat. His responses to questions became shorter, sharper. When someone mentioned the auditors, his jaw tightened visibly. Arrogance always cracks under pressure. Marcus was oblivious, too focused on his own performance anxiety. But others started noticing Thomas's mood shifts. His sudden irritability. The way he snapped at perfectly reasonable questions. One afternoon, I overheard him on the phone in his office, door not quite closed. It's routine, he was saying, voice tight. There's nothing to find. Just standard procedure. Someone on the other end must have questioned him, because Thomas's response was sharp. I said, it's handled. Don't call this number again. When he emerged from his office moments later, he looked pale. Our eyes met briefly, and something flickered across his face. Suspicion? Fear? I smiled blandly and returned to my work. 2 days later, a recruiter called me. A position at Stratton Industries, one of our competitors. Better title, better pay, actual room for advancement. Your reputation in the industry is excellent, she said. We've been watching your work. We'd love to discuss opportunities. A year ago, I would have dismissed the call immediately. Loyalty to TechFlow, to the team, to the belief that persistence would eventually pay off. Now, I listened carefully, asked questions, took notes. But I didn't say yes. Not yet. Because I'd learned something about revenge. Sometimes it's about leaving at exactly the right moment. When your absence causes maximum impact. When they realize too late what they lost. I needed to see how the audit played out first. I needed Thomas to understand his mistake completely. The cracks in Marcus's facade widened during a presentation to senior management. He was explaining our quarterly strategy, using slides I'd helped him create. The content was solid because I'd made it solid. But then the VP of Operations asked a question about implementation details. Specifics about timeline and resource allocation. The kind of question any department head should answer easily. Marcus froze. His confident expression crumbled. He glanced at his notes, then at Thomas, then back at his slides. Well, he began, then stopped. Started again. The implementation phase we're looking at. He couldn't explain his own strategy. Couldn't defend decisions he hadn't actually made. The room grew uncomfortable as his fumbling continued. I watched from my seat against the wall. Cleanup work staff didn't rate a spot at the table. I saw doubt enter the narrative. Saw senior leaders exchange glances. Saw Thomas's face tighten with barely controlled anger. After the meeting, Thomas pulled Marcus into his office. Their raised voices carried through the supposedly soundproof door. The favorite was failing publicly. And Thomas couldn't save him without exposing his own poor judgment. Arrived 2 hours later. Thomas's email was everything I'd hoped for. Dismissive. Arrogant. Accusatory, without evidence. He'd written it quickly, probably still angry for my request, not thinking about how it might look to anyone else reading it. Your recent attitude has been detrimental to team morale, he wrote. Your inability to support Marcus's leadership suggests deeper performance issues. I expect immediate improvement in your cooperation and enthusiasm for departmental decisions. I read it 3 times, then forwarded it to my personal email, saved it in multiple locations, added it to my growing file of documentation. This was no longer my word against his. This was Thomas, in writing, punishing me for being too competent, for making his favorite look bad by comparison, for not accepting my demotion with enough enthusiasm. I replied professionally, thanking him for the feedback and committing to improvement. Pure corporate speak that said nothing and promised less. But privately, I updated my documentation with dates, context, and clear patterns of retaliation. The email that would end him, and he'd written it himself. The audit team requested to speak with me 3 days later. They'd been through the vendor files I'd organized, and they had questions. I sat in the conference room with 3 auditors, their laptops open, my meticulously organized files displayed on the screen. Ms. Hart, you conducted this vendor audit? The lead auditor asked. Yes, as assigned by Thomas Brennan. Did you notice any irregularities? This was the moment. I could play dumb, protect myself, let corporate discover everything on their own timeline. Or I could tell the truth. Yes, I said calmly. Several vendors showed unusual patterns. I documented everything in the notes section of each file. I watched them pull up my notes. Detailed observations about Vertex Advisory and 3 other suspicious vendors. Dates. Amounts. Missing documentation. All presented factually, without accusation or interpretation. This is very thorough, the auditor said, something like respect in her voice. I believe in complete accuracy, I replied simply. They asked more questions. I answered each one calmly, with receipts for everything. When they finally dismissed me, I felt nothing but clarity. The truth was out now, documented and witnessed. Everything slowed down after that. The audit team extended their stay by another week. Thomas stopped smiling. His door stayed closed more often. Meetings were canceled or rescheduled without explanation. I watched the tension build from my desk, still doing my cleanup work, still helping Marcus when he asked, still playing the role of the compliant employee. But the atmosphere had changed. People whispered in hallways. Eyes followed Thomas when he walked through the office. The confident authority he'd wielded so casually was evaporating. Marcus sensed something was wrong, but didn't understand what. He kept asking if I'd heard anything about the audit. I always said no, which was technically true. I hadn't heard anything. I told them everything. Senior management started appearing more frequently. Brief conversations with the audit team. Closed-door meetings with department heads. The kind of quiet activity that signaled serious problems being addressed above our level. Thomas's fall had started, and there was nothing he could do to stop it now. His reputation fractured over the following weeks. Colleagues who used to seek his approval started avoiding him. His suggestions in meetings were questioned instead of automatically accepted. Senior management's tone with him shifted from collegial to coolly professional. The audit team finished their work and departed without fanfare. But the silence afterward was somehow worse than their presence. We all waited for the report, for the consequences, for whatever was coming next. Marcus resigned suddenly on a Thursday afternoon. No explanation, no farewell party. Just a brief company-wide email thanking everyone and announcing his last day was immediate. I heard later he'd been offered his old position back, a demotion framed as a lateral move. He'd chosen to leave instead. Without Marcus, Thomas's judgment looked even worse. The promotion that had humiliated me publicly was now a visible failure, impossible to ignore or excuse. Leadership started asking questions about the decision, about the department's actual performance, about who was really doing the work. And suddenly, people remembered. All those projects I'd led. All those clients I'd brought in. All those problems I'd solved. Thomas was suspended 2 days after Marcus left. The announcement was brief and formal. Pending an internal investigation, Thomas Brennan would be taking administrative leave. I saw him pack his office. He moved slowly, mechanically, placing framed photos and awards into a cardboard box. When he walked past my desk for the last time, he didn't look at me. Couldn't look at me. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction or triumph or even relief. Just clarity. This had never been personal. It had been about accountability. About consequences for treating people as disposable. About the universe correcting an imbalance. The interim department head called an all-staff meeting that afternoon. She acknowledged the uncertainty, promised transparency, and asked for our continued dedication during the transition. After the meeting, she asked to speak with me privately. Lucy, I've reviewed your work over the past 8 years. And I've reviewed what happened with the promotion. I want you to know that won't be how we operate going forward. I nodded, accepting the apology that wasn't quite spoken. We'll be posting the department head position internally, she continued. I hope you'll apply. That evening, I called the recruiter from Stratton Industries back. We'd stayed in touch over the past weeks. Now I was ready to discuss details. The offer was generous. Director of Client Strategy, significant pay increase, better benefits. A fresh start where my work would be recognized, where I wouldn't carry the weight of past humiliation. I accepted. My resignation letter was professional and brief. I thanked TechFlow for the opportunities, wished them success, and gave my standard 2 weeks notice. No accusations. No burned bridges. No dramatic revelations. I didn't need a victory speech. My work spoke for itself. The audit had spoken for itself. Thomas's suspension spoke for itself. I was simply moving forward, which was the most powerful statement I could make. Thomas was fired during my last week at TechFlow. I heard about it through the office grapevine, the same way news always traveled. The audit had found everything I'd documented and more. Improper vendor relationships, falsified approvals, financial irregularities that violated company policy and possibly law. He wouldn't just lose his job. There would be consequences that followed him. But I didn't celebrate, didn't gloat, didn't even feel particularly triumphant. I just kept working, training my replacement, documenting processes, ensuring a smooth transition. Professional to the end. Because this had never been about revenge. It had been about self-respect, about refusing to accept being diminished, about knowing my worth and acting accordingly. Thomas had destroyed himself. I'd simply refused to help him cover it up. Thomas never contacted me. No apology, no explanation, no attempt at reconciliation. The silence was absolute. And that was fine. Perfect, actually. I hadn't done any of this for closure. Hadn't documented his misconduct hoping for an apology. hadn't exposed the truth, seeking his regret. I'd done it because it was right. Because sunshine is the best disinfectant. Because systems only change when people refuse to enable them. His silence meant he still didn't understand. Still thought he was the victim of circumstances rather than his own choices. But I understood. And that was enough. My last day at TechFlow was quiet. A few colleagues took me to lunch. Some seemed genuinely sad to see me go. Others were probably just relieved the drama was over. I packed my desk, returned my badge and laptop, and walked out without looking back. Stratton Industries was everything TechFlow wasn't. My ideas were heard and implemented. My experience was valued. When I spoke in meetings, people listened and engaged rather than waiting for a man to repeat what I'd just said. The director title came with real authority and responsibility. Within 3 months, I'd restructured our client onboarding process, improved retention by 18%, and brought in 2 major accounts. At my 6-month review, the VP mentioned possible expansion into new markets. Would I be interested in leading that initiative? I didn't have to think about it. Absolutely. This was what merit looked like, what recognition felt like, what happened when competence was rewarded instead of punished. I'd become someone I barely recognized from my TechFlow days, confident, assertive, unafraid to claim my achievements. Thomas had tried to diminish me. Instead, he'd freed me to find an environment where I could truly excel. A year after leaving TechFlow, I ran into someone from my old department at an industry conference. We chatted briefly about mutual colleagues, market trends, and the usual professional small talk. "Did you hear about Thomas?" she asked, lowering her voice. "He can't find work anywhere. Word got around about what happened. Nobody wants to touch him." I nodded, feeling nothing in particular. Not satisfaction. Not pity. Just acknowledgement. Thomas had lost everything because he believed loyalty meant silence. Because he thought competence in subordinates was a threat rather than an asset. Because he'd confused control with leadership. I'd won, not by destroying him, but by refusing to stay where I was disrespected. By documenting truth. By walking away with my integrity intact and finding a place that valued what I offered. Favoritism failed because it always does eventually. Merit didn't fail. It just needed the right environment to flourish. Sometimes the strongest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's refusing to stay small in spaces that diminish you. It's thriving so loudly they can never forget what they lost when they lost you. I'd done that. And I'd do it again. Every single time. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.